Hey, it's Anthony Magnabosco here, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
For those of you watching now that are not familiar with David Smalley or Philip Rose, aka True Pooka, I would like to be the first to welcome you to the internet. You have to have been living under a rock, right? What I'd like to
frankincense and myrrh. Sorry.
What I'd like to do is we like to do the plugs up front. So if we could start with David, where's a good place?
Everything is David C. Smalley. My Twitter, Instagram, even my TikTok, my website, everything's David C. Smalley. That's really it. The show was called Dogma Debate for like 10 years. I recently just changed the name. It's just David C. Smalley. It's my name. That was a publicist thing. They were like, sometimes people know your show and don't know you, and I'm trying to market you for a comedy show or acting. She's like, we need to rebrand everything as David C. Smalley. So change the name, but I'm still doing the same old thing, trying to talk people out of their faith.
And Philip.
I still have the True Pooka channel. I rarely make videos on it right now. I always mean to get back to it to do it. If people want to go to it, then that's fine. It's on YouTube. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter is just where I go, where I do old man yells at clouds, essentially. So I wouldn't necessarily say you're going to get anything out of following that. You're probably better off just, what was that? David C. Smalley?
Yeah,
follow him. You'll get more content out of him than you will of me, realistically. So I'm going to do a plug for David here. That's what I'm going to do. Go to David C. Smalley.
Awesome.
Hey, I want to tell you guys real quick. One time I finished an entire debate, and they said, where the hell can we find out more about you? And I said, thethinkingatheist.com. And that's all I said.
That is funny. What do you two think about the negative criticisms? If it doesn't sting too much, maybe I can list off a few.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah.
And, funny, while you're pulling that up, I'll tell you, I was just talking with Anthony Magnabosco, like literally right before we started this. And I said, I wish we would actually do an interview at some point where someone asked me about the negative criticism. I'm not lying. This
Are you kidding?
Perfect timing. Because every time I'm on a show, they just want to know my opinions on Trump or my opinions on religion, or people ask me questions. How can I convince my grandmother to be an atheist right before she dies? Like, it's and so I get into a lot of weird conversations like that. Addressing the public criticism is really important. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay. Let's start with an article I read about. This is, I don't know how long ago you wrote this, how the left is killing language. I saw a lot of criticism levied against you on this one. What struck me was the tone of the authors of these various articles. They can write whatever they want. They're free to do whatever they want. It struck me as just really combative, really unproductive. Name calling is never a productive thing, and it was so much name calling. I was wading through this mire of name calling just to get what their point was. What is their actual criticism towards you? But they were happier to just call you things such as, so I wrote down some shitlord. He sits in his ivory tower, clickbait, alt-right, which Philip, I'll get to you. So there was criticism that you are quick to label people alt-right also. So keep that bookmarked. Okay. Also. That David asked too many softball questions, especially to like Dave Rubin or Dennis Prager. It just gives them an easy pass. And my favorite one is, David, did you know you are a name-dropping starfucker?
I did date a porn star for about 4 months, so they're not wrong. And she was a star, I promise. Here's the thing. That's funny. I love that. So, I just had someone cancel from my Patreon because I was too conservative. And then I had 3 other people cancel, calling me an SJW, who is a beta bitch, I believe, a beta bitch.
Geez.
I've been a libtard. I've been a neocon. All within sometimes the same tweet. It's so bizarre. Sam Harris put out an episode of his podcast talking about Black Lives Matter and the protests and everything else. And he said repeatedly on his podcast, he said, there are no solutions for these things. These are things that are very tough and there are no solutions. And I did a show responding to Sam where I said, hey, buddy, I love you, but bullshit. There are a lot of solutions we could do. And here's what I would do if I were in a position of leadership, if I were in charge, if I were in the government. Here's 13 things we should do to help fix the issues facing Black Lives Matter. And the conservative atheists came and called me SJW and how I need to be more like Pete Boghossian. And then Ryan Bell, a liberal former pastor, now liberal progressive atheist, took a screenshot of the tweet that my social media manager put out that said, here's how I would help fix the issues facing BLM, because it was a part of a 13-part series. Hypothetically, if I were in charge, he took that screenshot and said, this is white supremacy. And an entire Facebook thread with 50, 60 comments was all about how I was a white supremacist. Some people said, David Smalley, is that still a thing? And it was just an online bullying fiasco about me being terrible. And then when people would start asking, did you listen to the show? Everyone was admitting, no, I haven't heard it. And I'm like, since when did atheists become this group of people to form a belief about something without investigating it? Isn't that what we're supposed to be against, right? So I find that anytime I say, hey, I'm not on board with Antifa starting the fire at the CVS, then that's a Fox News talking point and I'm Sean Hannity's puppet. And when I rip Sean Hannity over a 45-minute episode, playing all the things he says that are lies, or catch Ben Shapiro in a bunch of bullshit, invite him onto my show and he dodges and says he doesn't want to do it, then I'm a left-wing social justice warrior who's a beta and just rolling over for the left. I mean, it's absurd. I'm trying to have nuanced discussions and I'm trying to be reasonable in the process. And unfortunately, that gets me attacked from both sides. If people would continue listening, they would understand that I pull a little bit of information from both sides and try to find something reasonable in between.
Yeah, there is definitely that polarization on social media, and I'm lucky that I don't have Twitter or some of those other things. So my ear is not to the ground with that, which is nice for me, because I don't even know about a lot of the crap that happens. But I kind of wonder where you do feel you are on that scale between like conservatism and progressivism, because I think that there has been a time where atheist YouTubers went through kind of a wave of conservatism, but that was about, maybe 10 years ago, like 7 years ago. And then we kind of went more into this left leaning place. And so I'm kind of curious where you see yourself, because I think a lot of people see you as being on a very left leaning show and then leaning much further right.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So out of when I voted for Joe Biden, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary and did my research on each individual candidate outside of that. I ended up voting completely for Democrats individually. I didn't just vote blue down the ticket. I did my research on each individual person and voted blue all the way down. And then out of the propositions for California, there were 14 state propositions. I voted with Democrats on 12 of them, and I voted with Republicans on 2 of them. So I find myself to be largely liberal, largely left-leaning, completely anti-Trump. I think there needs to be a huge blue wave in this election, because not only is Trump, I think, toxic for the country, I think that the Republicans in the Senate are complicit in allowing him to continue corruption. And so I'm pretty far left. But, for some people, if I say, I had a friend of mine was a police officer in Everman, Texas. His name's Alex Arango. He just died of COVID-19 about 48 hours ago. And it was heartbreaking. I posted a tweet about it, and immediately the shit started. If I have a friend who's a cop, I'm a neo-Nazi. If I don't condemn it, all cops are bad. So he must have been one of the bad ones. It just, the attacks are so vitriolic and black and white. So, and I got to say, I wasn't even really huge into YouTube. I've always been audio podcast first. So I've missed a lot of that stuff too. And to your point, your original point, anytime I'm able to talk to these folks and say, what is it that I said or did that makes you hate me so much? They can never actually quote anything. They'll tell me how I feel. You think this, or you do this, and I'll go, show it to me. 100% of the time, they failed at it. And when they try to go back and find something I've done, they can't find it because it sort of gets passed around in these anti-Smalley circles that I hold a view or I did something or said something, but they can't really provide evidence for that. And I'll be happy to talk about anything that is evidence because I probably have a reasonable explanation for it or an apology to offer. But that doesn't make me some monster that doesn't care about people. It's quite the opposite.
I'm thinking of two possible areas of criticism that would be directed at you. On one end, your friend, police officer friend who just died, that garnered criticism. I'm leaving my opinions out of things tonight, but I find that very troublesome. The other end is, and I'm gonna bookmark this. I'm gonna go to Philip, but be thinking about this. I'm having David Silverman on your show as well. That's what we're going to talk about next. Philip, so in researching this, I found Philip. I never knew that your moniker was the liberal ogre. Is that self-inflicted, or were you named that by others?
So
Is that a pejorative?
So that actually came about because, this is going back a bit for me. So I was now this is back when I was working at a YouTube studio in New York City, when they had the experimental and then they opened up the big, and it used to be called the Meatpacking District. And there was the area where they had all the hookers. It's gentrified, and now it's like a nice, you want to go and you want to have a nice dinner, and it's like a whole nice thing, and they have like a whole 2 floors there. And I was experimenting with the rebranding at the time, and I got the idea because you brought up the issue of the alt-right, for example. You said people accusing me of using the term alt-right too much, and now you have to keep in mind that term was created by Richard Spencer with the idea that it would be a catch-all term for anybody to comfortably kind of slide into, so that they could express criticism of essentially, and really anything that is liberal, because really the alt-right and the M-run kind of morphed into anti-liberalism. That's what it really became. So it was one of those tricky terms where on the one hand, it had a meaning and it didn't. And that he said that was exactly why he created it. And it was perfect that way, because anybody who was doing anything that gave the appearance of alt-right, you can say, well, you're alt-right. And then they'd be able to say, well, why are you saying that? And they can they can play the victim in that case. And they can say, well, you're accusing me of being something I'm not. So looking back on it in retrospect, I think I personally wish I hadn't used it quite as much, because I think I played into that strategy. And I think a lot of us did that. So I was going to rebrand as a liberal ogre. And I did that partly because I recognized, you mentioned at one point, algorithms and trends. And I guess you were going to have a conversation about that at one point, but this is related to that. So on YouTube, the alt-right, or I will just say anti-liberals, or the people who are more right, the one place where they really won out, where they were really good at gaming the algorithm. They could very quickly work out how to make it work to their favor and drive traffic to videos they want, and essentially starve out other videos. And that, I think the atheist community at that time on YouTube, they suffered a lot from that, because you'd see any channel who did a video that they felt they can make use of in some way, either positive or negative, it would get a ton of traffic. And that would make the content creator go, hey, I got a lot of traffic for this. I want to build my channel. Therefore, I should focus on perhaps doing that some more. So I was toying with the idea of trying to make use of that and make use of them in order to build a channel in that direction. But in the end run, I decided, you know what, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go that way. So I had it for a little while. I did one show episode with it, and it was at that point, I think we're getting to 2016, 15. I moved off YouTube and I started doing in real life activism. I started working with Rise and Resist and People's Power, Indivisible. And from there, I did that for a year or two, and then I moved more into the corporate sector. And now I would probably be considered like an evil capitalist Democrat at this point because I do that by some people.
Well, the name
like
is
I would Chamber of Commerce Foundation, things like that.
the name is definitely following you from the research I've done. Just trying to catch up on True Pooka. You have admittedly kind of life has taken. You haven't been as ubiquitous as you were back when I first discovered you. So I'm just trying to catch
recognize
up.
the way YouTube is going, you know,
Right.
and they did lectures and they discussed it at the studio. And I could tell, I was like, this is going in a direction. You have to understand this, the premise of the studios, and they're worldwide now, was when YouTube first started, if you remember way back, the original, like, I don't know how long have you been around, David? Were you around back in like 2009, 10, or either of you?
That's about when I started. Yeah.
Yeah. So you remember the page was different, and you even had remember everybody, all the atheists did their videos in the education category. Because the education category was the one that had the least traffic, so it got the most attention. And everybody knew to go there if you wanted to get something interesting and new and novel. And that's how it started. And then they started changing the page. And the entire purpose of the changing the page was so that they can control traffic, so they could change it, so that instead of people going to YouTube to like basically websites, it would generate traffic from YouTube. It would go in the other direction. That was the idea. So you had to actually build your brand like you're doing. You mentioned your rebranding. You had to build a brand outside YouTube so that you can then put your videos on YouTube and it would drive the traffic in the other direction. That was a large part of their goal of what they were trying to do. And I can tell by the studio setup, they were integrating with the film school, the acting schools, like in New York City, and they did this in the other cities. And I could tell, I was like, well, this is obvious. They're trying to go in the direction of YouTube TV. This is before YouTube TV existed, that it was even thought of. This is back when they had the DMCA tube and everything, and then like power to the people, that kind of thing on YouTube. So I started moving away from it and going into more real life stuff, as I would put it, because I was just like, I don't think I have the resources or time to compete in that arena. Like, it takes a lot of time to build a successful YouTube channel. It's like a work of effort now. Like, the people who do it, you have to put a lot of time and energy into it. And it's not just on YouTube, and it's not just with your production value. You have to do a lot of things on other platforms to do it. So that was like a main reason I moved away from it, because I just felt that I didn't want to be beholden to a website that was so whimsical and how it might just arbitrarily try to cut you off at the knees. And, wham, the next day, your income, everything is gone. I didn't want that. Yeah. And I feel bad for everybody who has that, because they need to form like they have equity and they have SAG for the actors in screen. They need to have a YouTube version of that, so that you guys have some power when you go up against them, when you have difficulties and issues, and how your content is handled. Did that answer your question at all, or did I just wander way off?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to keep you on track, though. This one's going to be a yes or no. In retrospect, do you have any regrets of your harsh criticism towards lobbying the alt-right moniker, or other things against the likes of Armored Skeptic, or maybe calling Noel Plum a toxic alpha male? Would you do it differently?
No, and Noel and we're pretty good friends, so I don't think he takes it personally.
Okay.
We fought over that, and we're friendly. So no, I think anybody. You want a yes or no? I'll leave it at no.
This is David earlier talked about Sam Harris's speech, and he had a problem with it. I just happened to write down some notes on that. This is now, Philip, this is for you, and David, of course, jump in. But this is David Smalley's ideas to counter that Sam Harris speech. this is his ideas for police reform, and I found them really fascinating. In fact, I'm really relating to a lot of them, except for one. I'll show you where I have a point of contention. One, acknowledge on a federal level that it is a problem that cops are 24% more likely to point a gun at a black man. Number two, implement code enforcement officers to handle nonviolent calls, i.e. noise complaints, traffic, nonviolent activity, and a regular staff of social workers to handle the mental health calls. That would free the burden of the police officers so they wouldn't be so overworked. Number three, develop accredited federal police training requirements enacted, countrywide, not state by state, input by civilians, specifically civilians that were formerly unfairly targeted, to get their point of view. And finally, police academies should be no less than 1 year long with no militarized training. This is where I have I just want to clarify with David, no militarized training, but to include conflict resolution, community building, and some non-lethal, to include maybe and he even brought in the MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, something non-lethal, restraining type unarmed combat moves. So first off, David, no militarized training, so no firearm training whatsoever. Do they not carry firearms anymore? Is there any range training? And second, Philip, I think this is a point where we can maybe agree. Looking at these, do these seem cogent to you?
Let me answer that first, because I do not stand by the statement that no firearms training. And I don't recall saying that. If I said that, it was a mistake.
No, you didn't. I just read into it, so that was all on me.
Was this
Okay.
Harris saying this or David? I wasn't clear on that. Is this
Yes.
This is David's response to Sam Harris's video.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so there were 13 things, not just 4. I want to be clear, and there are clips of them on Instagram if people don't want to listen to the whole episode. But there's more context if you listen to the whole episode of me responding to Sam. I think my point was, and what I try to be clear about, is I think something like 85 to 90% right now of the police officers' training is focused on firearm training, and I think that's a mistake. Of course, they should have firearms training. Absolutely.
Great point.
What's that?
That's a great point. I love it.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that I would be in favor of everyone having required mandatory training in order to buy a gun. I am someone who holds a concealed carry permit from Texas. I am a gun owner. I'm not a gun nut. I don't think we should all have them. I'm okay with some of Biden's restrictions on ARs and everything else, but we can get into that another time. My concern is not having information or training to handle something. So I would never advocate to not train officers to use firearms. But why are we spending 85 to 90% on that and literally none on conflict resolution or de-escalation techniques? Why are we not teaching them what counselors say to someone in the midst of a crisis? When they show up to a home and there's a man, completely naked, covered in butter, holding a knife, they pull their gun out because they want to go home to their family at night. I understand that, but pulling that gun out in the face of this situation, while it keeps them safe, it puts the society that they're here to protect in danger. And I think we need to work around different training regimens. When you look at how cops just immediately go to the gun, immediately go to, I thought he had a gun, immediately go to a twisting motion, or he refused my commands 3 times in a row. It's really bizarre that people get shot for moving or reaching or touching. Now, it's a dangerous job, but it should be a dangerous job. If you get to hide behind a tree trunk and shoot at anything that moves, it's no longer a dangerous job. And you don't get to say that anymore. So I wish we would invest more in that type of psychological training and just bring down the concept of militarizing our police force. I should not be in LA watching the cops drive by in a Humvee with armor and shields and riot gear. That's more of a police state than it is someone here to protect me. So that's really my point in all of that. And the other things that I laid out have to do with investing in low-income communities, looking at improving education in those areas, because those are the real ways you lower crime in the area. You don't stop gun violence with a bigger gun. You stop gun violence by educating people and helping them get out of their bad situations. So that was the point in those 13 steps.
I wanted to ask you to kind of give your opinion on the defund movement. I know it gets a lot of criticism from both sides, I think, because there's, to me, from what I understand, it's about recognizing the undue burden that we place on the police for things that shouldn't be seen from a military lens, of things like mental health and homelessness and things like that. So, and I've actually been through some of that de-escalation training for mental health clinics. One of those is called SAMA, and it's for clinical settings where you don't have a gun. So I've been through that myself because I work in a mental health clinic. But so I'm curious what your take on that is, because I think it's misunderstood a lot of the time.
Yeah, thank you for letting me clear that up. I think liberals, for the most part, we're terrible at marketing. Okay, we turn things into hashtags that are just so damn confusing, and then it ends up putting a target on us. We almost develop our own straw man of our own position, and then put it on a board. And then when you're really advocating in favor of women's rights, you put "murder your local rapist" on the poster board and walk down the street. We're just really bad at saying what we mean. And I think defund police could have been marketed as let's not overwork the police. How could cops be mad at that? How could the Back the Blue people not be mad at that? Be mad at that? Because ultimately, that's what defunding police is really saying. And I know people are shaking their heads and being upset right now, but if you actually look at the real plans, like I want to talk about Dave Silverman in a moment, but when he was on the show recently, he did say Seattle just fired 100 cops. There's no justification. They just fired 100 cops. I pulled up the article. What they did was they took the money that was going to those 100 officers who primarily their only job is to respond to vagrant calls and to deal with removing homeless people. That's their constant work, is removing homeless people or homeless people phone calls. And they're taking that money and investing that into housing for the homeless. That is divesting.
Love it.
That is divesting or divesting out of the enforcement aspect and investing in community programs. That is what defunding the police really is. Now, for people who say we should have no cops at all and the community should police themselves, that's where I get in trouble for saying that's where the left kind of loses their mind. I'm not okay with that. I'm not on board with that. I feel like there's no evidence to back up that that's going to work. But we also don't need to take the conservative approach, which is, I know what we need, more M16s and Humvees, and then those poor neighborhoods will get it through their head that we're not taking their shit. That's not going to work either. So investing in the community. If you have to lay off one police officer for every 30 so that there's a psychologist on staff to attend these mental health calls or a Signal 50 call, that's defunding the police and moving that funding into the social work department, where someone who is trained in de-escalation techniques can show up with an officer and offer a first line before anyone gets shot. How many times do we hear a man with a mental health problem calls 911, gets shot by police? It's disturbing. They are here to protect and serve, not just protect themselves. No, they're here to protect people who are hurting, and our people who are threatening suicide or who are struggling mentally. They need help in that moment, not to stare down the barrel of a gun. And I can tell you personally, we can go into my story if you want, but I had a moment where two cops pointed guns at me and started screaming things at me, and they were yelling different orders at me. One was saying, "Put your hands up." The other was saying, "Turn your damn car off." Well, to turn my car off, I had to drop my hand down. And I had my hands up and they were both screaming. And I've got to tell you, you think that made me want to comply? It enraged me like you would not believe. They were bullies. They were screaming orders at me. They had guns pointed at me. I can totally understand now wanting to fight someone who can literally kill you. I get it. I de-escalated the situation, probably because of my 10 years experience talking with Christians. But I was able to crack through the irrational screaming. And all I said was, I turned to one guy and I said, "You're giving me opposite commands." He looked at the other cop and said, "Shut up." He said, "Turn your car off." And I slowly lowered my hand and turned my car off. That shouldn't be the case. The citizen should not have to de-escalate the situation because two dudes with big, powerful chests and their guns and screaming, and it was all a bully type show. That cannot be our police force. We have to police with love. And I think that's where defund police really needs to root themselves.
My wife even mentioned, because I'm pacing around, I did my research for the show, and she's like, I haven't seen you this nervous in a long time doing a show. I was like, I know, right? And then I started, looking inward, like, why am I so nervous for the show? I think 10% of it, I don't get really starstruck anymore, but both of you are the old school. Like when I first got introduced to YouTube atheism, especially Philip, the true Pooka. I mean, that was one of the first ones I started following. And a little while later, Dogma Debate, I never missed a show back when you were here in Dallas. So having both of you, two big names on the show. Yeah. About 10% of the reason I'm nervous, maybe a little bit of that. I think Courtney and we've been doing this 4 years. We don't really get so starstruck anymore. I think 90% of it though is, when I started writing down questions, I started realizing how hot button these are, and how spirited. I'll just say it this way: how spirited this discussion could potentially get tonight. With that in mind, I even told my wife, I was like, I'm going to pull an Anthony Magnamosco on these guys, and I'm going to go straight epistemology. I'm not going to give my opinions on shit
That's
tonight.
awesome.
Oh, no.
Open yourself up to answering his questions too. That's very important.
So we just did a session on my show where I was the Christian and he street epistemology the fuck out of me. So it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
I would like to do one on Anthony. You eat meat, right, Anthony?
I do.
One of these days on your show, my show, just one of these days, I would like to try out my amateur street epistemology on you and try to help you understand why I think it's barbaric that eating meat is wrong.
Okay.
I love that.
I've been pushing out my thoughts on that for quite a while. So yeah.
I did an episode about that a few years ago where I actually went to a pig farm and actually challenged my own dogma of eating meat. And it was a really eye-opening situation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still bite the hell out of a pig's ass today, but I feel bad about it in the
I
process.
just feel bad about it. It's getting me more and more convinced that pain is just a subjective thing that we, bringing it down to pain.
It's not the pain for me.
No,
it's
it's not the pain
it's
for
the
me
cages. It's the lack of emotional support that we provide them, and they're especially.
Yeah.
But that's another topic
Yeah,
for sure.
Have a good show.
All right. All right, let's